Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning back into the Liminal Pathways podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I cannot believe that this is episode 5 that I'm currently recording. I am blown away by the feedback that I am receiving, the likes, the shares, the 5-star reviews, all of this momentum really helps me out in getting the word out about my podcast, whether it is the solo episodes, the astrology reports, and the guest episodes. I have a few more guests up my sleeve, and overall, I'm just so grateful to have this opportunity to speak my truth, speak my voice, and this episode is going to be part one, the astrology of April 2026, tying that in with the energy of the rest of March. As I'm recording this, it is Friday, March 27th. And it's funny how astrology works because I wasn't inspired to record an episode until the equinox. The equinox was last Friday, March 20th. And as you may know, the equinox is equal day and light. So we had daylight savings time on March 8th, which further shows you that time isn't real, but I digress. So now here, at least on the east coast of the US, we have 7 p.m. sunsets and we are on our way to 8 p.m. sunsets, which makes me very happy because I don't do well with 4:30 p.m. sunsets. I think that we should abolish daylight savings time and have 5:30 p.m. sunsets in the winter. Just have the sunrise a little later. And we all know why we have the daylight savings time, which again, that Rockefeller school system, that factory system, emulating the bells, work, work, work. So part one, astrology. And part two, I really enjoy talking about some of the books that I'm reading, I'm listening to, and how it connects with not only the astrology, but also life, as within, so without, and the intersections, the interplays between astrology and life. And as I get older and study more and more, especially after my Saturn return, a headphone, sorry. I just find that the astrology is so literal. You just need to know how to look at it. For example, I was taking a look at my solar return charts. And if you're not familiar with what a solar return chart is, it's a snapshot of your birthday where the transiting sun in the sky is conjunct your natal sun. So, for example, as a Cancer sun, when the transiting sun is at the same degree of Cancer that it was when I was born, we consider that in astrology a solar return chart. So you can look at that solar return chart, see themes in your life. And it was very interesting. I was looking at my solar return chart for 2024, which was my 29th birthday, and juxtaposing it with the solar return chart from 2025, which was my 30th birthday. And then looking at the solar return chart for 2026. So that's my upcoming, the big 3-1. Yeah, so looking at the solar return chart for 2024, I mean, the writing was on the wall. Saturn was at 19 degrees Pisces. So gearing up for that Saturn return, which I did have in 2025. Not only that, we had Uranus, which will be heading into Gemini, which I will talk about in April. At the, it was at the anaretic, but on the solar return chart, Uranus was smack dab on my midheaven, like to the degree. And funny thing about my chart, which is kind of hilarious, my rising sign, so you have the angles, the ascendant, which is the first house cusp, yourself, that first house who you are. We have the seventh house cusp, the descendant, so your relations with other people, partnerships, business partnerships, etc. The seventh house is you and other people. the midheaven, which is the top of your chart, the highest point of your chart, and the IC, which is like the basement of your chart. Just so happens that my angles, and these angles are very sensitive, right? You need to know that's why when I do readings, I say, do you have your birth time? You need a birth time or close enough birth time. Ask your mom if were you born in the morning, at night, ideally as specific as possible, because these angles matter. But to that point, so my angles, the rising, the descendant, IC, MC, is 1 degree off from the president of the United States. So I think that that's very interesting that, yeah, that summer when, yeah, in Butler, Pennsylvania, when, the ear thing happened, juxtaposing that with, I mean, I'm not the president, events in my life and certain like beheadings. So Trump and I both have our midheavens on a fixed star called Algol, commonly associated with Medusa. And just seeing how that panned out in my life, like Uranus on the midheaven while I was going through my Saturn return. And another thing on that 2024 solar return chart was the vertex. And I feel like we don't talk about the vertex enough. Is a sensitive point, like some like related to like the moons or the nose or whatever. I'm really not a math person, but the vertex is like tied to, it's not a planet, like fate. So vertex, my vertex was conjunct Pluto on the Saturn, not Saturn return, the solar return chart. Pluto, death, rebirth, transformation. And if that's not crazy enough, I had vertex, fate on my Pluto, death and rebirth. Both the vertex and the Pluto were squaring my nodes, so my north node and my south node. So just showing like those three things together, the Saturn return, Uranus on the midheaven, and Pluto and vertex squaring the nodes, is like the events of that year, like leading up to my 30th birthday, like were inevitable and I couldn't have avoided them even if I tried. That being said, that was 2024 into 2025. My 2025 solar return chart had Venus, the planet of love, pleasure, value, money, and Uranus, change, surprise, conjunct at 29 degrees of Taurus, the anaretic degree. I talk a lot about degrees, that threshold, that cusp degree. And I thought that was very interesting for many reasons. So natally, in my natal chart, I have my Venus and Uranus both at 29 degrees, and they're part of a yod with Pluto. A yod is a finger of God aspect where you have two planets making a sextile, the base planets. So for me, it's Pluto and Uranus, and that's pretty much a generational thing, those planets making sextiles. So Pluto and Uranus, and then probably going to say this word wrong. They make a quincunx, Quin. This is going to be fun to edit later. I'll put it in the captions, a quincunx to my Gemini, to my Venus in Gemini. So if that's not an easy aspect, that's not like a trine or a sextile. They don't communicate well with each other. But it's like that pressure is like forcing that Venus, and my Venus is in the 10th house. It's very public. So here's me trying to just loop all of that together because there's a reason why it's coming up. Oh, yeah, because when I talk about the April 2026 astrology, we are going to have that same Venus and Uranus conjunction at 29 degrees of Taurus that we had in July of 2025, right? Uranus went retrograde, so it was in Gemini for a hot second, back into Taurus. I think retrograded to like 26, 27 degrees Taurus. So Algol, associated with beheadings, and Medusa is 26 degrees of Taurus. So I don't think it retrograded to that point, but we felt that the reverberations of it, right? So that same Venus and Uranus conjunction that we had in July, we're going to have again in April. And this is a pretty common prediction, but having something to do with the stock market and the volatility of resources. And I've also been reading a lot about the alchemical astrological properties and signs of oil with events in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz being shut down, and how that impacts everything, and how we are extremely interconnected, and gas prices being a consequence of this war that nobody wants. That I Okay, I'm getting social studies teacher. Um, the regime is bad. Ayatollah, bad. All that, yes. And just when I taught AP World, I always talked about the White Revolution, 1953, the CIA and the MI6, the US and the UK, planning a coup, overthrowing democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh, who wanted to nationalize the Iranian oil supply. And the West is like, no, we can't do that. So the Shah was, a Western puppet. And yes, 1978, 1979, we have the Iranian Revolution. Women's rights are down the drain. And it's also thinking like, the US, does the US really care about the rights of women in Iran? The US doesn't even care about the rights of women in the US. I'm gonna let that sink in for a minute. Like, hello? So, yeah. So, kind of just tying this all together because I do have the March transits up. I also wanted to say that we are in uncharted territory. Like, since the 20th, the equinox, right? Around that time, we have all planets direct. Jupiter, I believe, was the last of the planets to go direct. That stationed direct at 15 degrees of Cancer. Oh, and then we also had Mercury stationed direct on the North Node at 8 degrees of Pisces. So we have this forward momentum until May 6th. So April is another of that like thresholdy month, especially with Uranus, the planet of surprises, literally keeping us on our toes. I don't know what the hell's happening. And I feel like a lot of astrologers are like, we are in uncharted territory. So yeah, just kind of putting that out there. I believe that I mentioned the Pluto, the fact that Pluto is at 5 degrees of Aquarius. This is the first time in our lifetime that Pluto has been at 5 degrees Aquarius. I know it was doing a big old retrograde from like 2023, 2024, right? Going back and forth from Capricorn to Aquarius, right? But we haven't got to 5 degrees Aquarius. And Saturn at 5 degrees of Aries is making a sextile. So the Saturn and Pluto, the heavy hitters, right? Pluto, transformation, destruction, Scorpio, right? Very alchemical. Saturn is the taskmaster. Saturn is, did you do this right? I'm going to make sure it can withstand this pressure. So Saturn and Pluto are making a sextile, and Aries and Aquarius. Okay, that's great. The last time that Saturn and Pluto made a major aspect together was that conjunction in January 2020. And is it just me? No, it's not just me. But I just feel like 2020 and 2026 have very interesting adjacent energy. Like I've always been spiritually tuned in, but I feel like for me, that spiritual awakening happened right before the shutdown, like months. We're talking months before that shutdown. And I know on March 13th of this year, we had an eclipse coming out of eclipse season. And it seems very parallelly and in a way that's difficult to explain, but it's like we've done this before. And I don't know if anyone else is getting almost like deja vu feelings, like, have we been here? There's like timelines coming together. So just putting that out there. So now I'm going to pivot to talking about the April 2026 astrology, which I feel like I've done already, but I want to go much deeper into that. So April 2nd, we start off with a full moon in Libra at 12 degrees. Moons, I'm also going to try to explain astrology as I go because I don't know where all of my listeners are at and teacher. So With the April 2nd full moon, the sun is in Aries and the moon is in Libra. Aries and Libra are opposites. Aries and Libra are war and peace. Aries is ruled by Mars. Libra is ruled by Venus. Libra loves diplomacy. Aries is war. And something that I feel like I touched on often in the podcast or like a reel or something is all of the stuff of February with that Saturn Neptune conjunction, the striking Iran on the last day of February. It's just like all of that happens during Pisces season, like mass delusion season. What the hell is going to happen in the season of Aries, in the season of war? And it's giving a lot of uncharted territory. Like we've passed the threshold of I don't even know what. I'm just taking a look at aspects. Okay, so this full moon in Libra is going to be squaring Jupiter. Jupiter, as we've discussed, stationed direct in Cancer. So the planet of expansion, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. It's creating some friction between the solar power that wants to go, that wants to get things done, that doesn't care about your feelings, who's going to plow through it. And that moon, that tug of war between the sun and the moon's like, can we negotiate? Is there anything that we can try to negotiate? Let's see, we also got Mercury at 14 degrees of Pisces, right, coming out of that Mercury retrograde. So even though Mercury's direct, it's still in the sign of Pisces. So I feel like there can still be confusion in communication. So just making sure that everything is checked, right? You dot your I's, cross your T's, all that. So April 9th, right, we got Mars, the planet of war, entering Aries, the sign of war. And then literally 4 days after that, Mars makes a conjunction with Neptune. And remember, with Neptune and Saturn and Aries, anytime a planet's in Aries, like the sun right now is in Aries, is Aries season. So I went into Aries, immediately conjuncted with Neptune, slow-moving planet, and then Saturn. We had that Sun-Saturn cazimi in Aries. So we have a cluster party of Aries that we're going to be dealing with. So on April 13th, Mars, the planet of war, conjuncts Neptune, the Pisces' favorite planet to be in. Neptune is confusion, delusion. So I feel like that's further getting into the psyops. I also feel like there are, well, duh, water is wet, but like so many psyops online. Like you don't know what you're reading, if it's real, if it's AI. 10 years ago, when I was a student in college, I remember the most beneficial course I took wasn't even a history course. It was a news literacy course. It was a journalism. I fell in love. It was such a great class. Media literacy. How do we know what's real? How do we know what's verifiable? How do we know what's reliable? And this was only like 10 years ago. And now with AI, deep fakes, and I've been doing a lot of reflection actually on generations and media and tech. And as a 90s baby, right? I got my first smartphone when I was like 17, 16, 17. But when you were like 13, 14, like you were hanging out with your friends, you went to the computer room. You had this big chunky computer with like the dial up and like the windows and the AIM and like those were the days. We got to bring that back because just having all this unfiltered, unfettered all the time to our phones and the algorithms that keep us glued to our phone and it's addictive. And I think I saw something about Meta and YouTube. Was it YouTube? That was found liable in a case of being addictive. And I'm an adult, which is crazy because I'm an adult. Okay. But children, like teenagers, babies, they're just, okay, iPad thrown in front of them, call it a day. And this is me just going off on a tangent again. But I'll get back to the astrology soon. But it's like, who's necessarily to blame? Is it the parents' fault? I sometimes think yes. But then I'm also like in this capitalist hellscape, right? You have both parents if you're lucky to have, two-parent household. Parents love each other. working all the time. Daycare costs a fucking arm and a leg. So it's just really just a shitty situation on all ends. And I can speak to that from an educator's perspective. There's so many people pointing the fingers and trying to blame this and trying to blame that. And yeah, I'm not a parent, so I don't have the perspective. I don't know what it's like to be a parent. And I don't know what it's like to be a student. I know what it's like to be a teacher. And yes, there's we're all pointing the fingers, blaming each other. Is there an answer? Kind of just like in February with the release of the ST, I'm so angry, this, that. I'm like, how can people? But it's just so much bigger than the two-party system that keeps us at play. So it's like, yeah, I don't have the answers. I am a seeker. I have, you know, a master's degree. I'm well read, but the more I learn, the less I know. And it's crazy. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to stop learning because that's how I am. So, damn, that was like a Socrates quote or something. Okay, let me lock in. So Mars conjunct Neptune, illusion, delusion, right? I was talking about AI. See how like all my thoughts come together, but in this war aspect, it's giving psyop. It's giving psyop energy. And then in 2 days, the 15th of April, Mercury enters Aries. So add another planet to the Aries party. And the next day, the 16th, you have the Sun, which is our identity, conjunct Chiron. So just pulled up the chart for April 16th, which is crazy because that day in 2025, everything changed for me, but we're not talking about that right now. So April 16th, we have the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, and Neptune, and Chiron in Aries. That is a disgusting amount of Aries energy. Of course, the ruler of that, Mars, is also in Aries. Um, oh shit. And then yeah, Uranus is at the anaretic degree, 29 degrees, because later on in April, Uranus will go into Gemini for the next 7 years. So this is like the last stand, the last hurrah of all of that Uranus and Taurus energy that we've been dealing with since 2018, 2019. Just so bizarre because on one hand, that seems like it was yesterday, but then also feels like it was eons ago. Time is really funny when you think about it. It really is. Wow. Okay. So the Sun and Chiron will make a conjunction, and then the next day, Mercury and Neptune will make a conjunction. So there's a lot of concentrated energy, right, on the later degrees of Aries, the completion. Are we completing the cycle of war? Do we, right? The astrology is a study of opposites. So the medicine is in the opposing sign. Can we find the Libra side to this? Excuse me. So just circling back to that April 16th chart, Sun at 26 degrees, Aries, Chiron at 26 degrees, and then Neptune and Mercury at 2 degrees. So while we have our wounds, our light is being shined collectively on the greatest wounds in Aries pertaining to war. While that is happening, we have communication and illusion regarding to the same thing. I don't know. Well, maybe we watch this after the fact and we're like, okay. Like sometimes I'll do that. I'll listen to my own podcast episodes after the fact. I'm like, oh, okay. So it's kind of like figuring out like how can we like use this now? Oh great. So I just talked about the Sun conjunct Chiron, Mercury conjunct Neptune, fun stuff on a new moon in Aries. Plants and seeds. I always look at full moons as a climax of a cycle. Full moon, climax, new moon, beginnings and endings. Beginnings are endings, the never ending loop. So And this is the end of Aries season, that 17th new moon. On the 19th of April, we have Mars conjunct Saturn in Aries. That's still just like, to me, I get like the visual download of like pressing on the brakes and the gas at the same time. Don't do that. But like seriously, like that stop and go, stop and go, stop and go. Because Mars wants to go, go, go. Saturn's like stop, stop, stop in Aries. I really don't like to be a doomer. But I'm also like not gonna like sit here and fearmonger too. But like, it's just was like we had so much stuff happen during Pisces season, and now this is like Aries season on steroids. So lose your cool. Don't lose your that was crazy. Don't lose your cool. And at least on 420, we have the sun entering Taurus. But it's like, as we know, or maybe you don't know, you can have the sun enter another sign and still have like a cluster of energy in another sign, right? Because the sun's going to enter Taurus. We're still going to have Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Neptune, three or more and Chiron. We still have the Aries stellium, right? So, yeah, speaking of April 20th, the same day that the sun enters Taurus, we're going to have Mercury, communication, conjunct Saturn. So have your words pass the test of time. So definitely warning against impulsivity in speaking, which is something that I struggle with as a Gemini Mercury. And is also like my biggest superpower because that's the duality of Mercury, and that's something that I'm actually going to be talking about in part two of this. But yeah, this Mercury conjunct Saturn is like giving like digital footprint energy. Like, can your words withstand the test of time? Like, is what you're saying, are you comfortable having that out there memorialized forever? Legacy. So it's like we have this triple conjunction of Mercury, Saturn, and then the next day, Venus, sorry, not Venus, Mercury and Mars. So the way we speak and the way that we take action are going to be conjunct in Aries with Saturn in the mix. So our actions and communications are being like cemented in the library of all time, the Akashic records. I mean, it always is. Just saying. And then, yeah, here we go. This is linking it directly to what I was talking about earlier regarding the solar returns, right? So I said around the 4th of July of 2025, we had Venus and Uranus at 29 degrees of Taurus, who's in my solar return chart. And then Uranus went retrograde. And then we have this, like, guess I am calling it a do-over, like another chance to like get it right. So yeah, on April 24th, Venus conjuncts Uranus at 29 degrees of Taurus and 53 minutes. Venus will enter Gemini later on that day, and then in 2 days from there, April 26th, Uranus enters Gemini and is not retrograding back into Taurus. So I'm kind of excited for that. But again, it's like, look at how that applies to your chart. Check out what house 29 degrees of Taurus falls into for you. If it falls into your 10th house, it's going to have to do most likely something with your public image, how you're being perceived. Whereas if that comes in your fourth house, something with home and family, sixth house routine, seventh house partnerships, what have you. And take a look too if you have a lot of, I have a lot of 29 degrees in my chart. So since 2022, right, we've had all these outer planets like vacillating between masculine and feminine signs, right? I think Pluto was the first one to do that from Cap to Aquarius. Saturn going into Pisces in 2023, just went into Aries for the next 3.5 years. Neptune going into Aries, and then Uranus going into Gemini, going from like feminine signs, quote unquote, to masculine signs, like this new epoch energy. So back to my original point, it's been like pinging my chart like crazy because I have that yod with these planets at mature critical degrees, and it's just been like ping, 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 ping. So, yes, that is part one. And let's pivot into part two. You know that I like to tie in literature, books that I'm reading, things that have crossed into my awareness, usually when words, phrases come into my awareness two, three times, I know that there's a message in there. So it's interesting how this one came into my awareness. Back in late 2025, a girlfriend of mine had recommended a book by Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist. I feel like is his most popular piece of literature. I read that in 2020. I was reading The Witch of Portobello that altered my brain chemistry. Really, really enjoyed it. Highly recommended it. And in this book, they were talking about Saint Sarah, patron saint of the Romani people, how located in the south of France, there's Saint Sarah. There's a pilgrimage to Saint Sarah. I believe she is the Black Madonna. And somehow, so that was, let's call that October, November 2025. We're in March, almost April 2026. A couple of weeks ago, I was on TikTok at all places, and I was looking at videos about my name, like Sarah name origin, and I'm very familiar with the story of Sarah from the Bible, right? She miraculously was able to have a child at like 90 years old or something like that. And again, going into that conversation about the Abrahamic religions that Harrison and I spoke of and the mythology of that, it's very interesting stemming from Abraham, right? Sarah couldn't conceive, so she gave Abraham to, her maid Hagar, and then you have Ishmael, and that's, the genesis of the religion of Islam that branched off from Judaism. Of course, you have Christianity in there, right? Jesus of Nazareth, which brings me to my next point, because as I was like scrolling videos, I've forgotten, but Saint Sarah was out of my awareness. And then I came across another video of Sarah, and then I put two and two together, the daughter of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And I'm like putting all these puzzle pieces together because Harrison and I also talked about Mary in our latest podcast. And I believe we talked about Jesus as well. So let me read to you the synopsis, and I will link the story in the show notes. It's called Mary Magdalene's Daughter, The Story of Sarah. And I have instant chills because that's my name. We both spell it with the H. And this was written in November 2023 by Pia Orleane, Ph.D. So this is just the Amazon synopsis. A beautiful story of the way of love, portrayed by the daughter of Mary Magdalene and Jesus of Nazareth. The story revealed in this book was transmitted directly to the author, which is Pia, by Mary Magdalene's previously unknown daughter, Sarah, who shares the Pleiadian. There's the Pleiadian again, because I was talking about Bringers of the Dawn and all these other Pleiadian books that have came into my consciousness. And Venus and Uranus are going to be sitting on the Pleiades, which is that fixed star cluster in the late degrees of Taurus, early Gemini. Just saying. So anyway, circling back, Sarah, who shares the Pleiadian perspective of the true mission of her family. Jesus of Nazareth, his mother, Mary, his wife, Mary Magdalene, and his two children, Sarah and Timaeus. Timaeus. I think it was Timaeus in the recording. Sarah gave us an inside look at their family's trials and true purpose in coming to Earth from the stars to help humanity evolve and grow through living in the true Pleiadian way of love. And again, I feel like with a lot of this Pleiadian stuff I've been talking about, I've been on the spiritual journey forever. I feel like even 2 years ago, if you would have talked to me about this, I think I would have laughed and said that it was nonsense. I don't think it is. I'm being completely honest. And I'm a historian. I like to, trust but verify. But there's like I was saying earlier, there's so much that we don't know. So I like to read everything with a grain of salt. But it's like as I'm listening to this, like things just like feel true in my body. It's like this cellular yes. And again, your mileage may vary, right? You can read this and not resonate with it at all. But if you're listening to my podcast, I recommend maybe trying it out. So, this channeled New Age message from Sarah, the daughter of Jesus of Nazareth and Mary Magdalene, was given to the author Pia Orleane, Ph.D., to reveal the Pleiadian wisdom of the way of love. Sarah was taught the principles of love and the truth about ascension by her grandmother, Mother Mary. It confuses me, I'm sorry, that the mother and the grandma are both Mary, but let me lock in. Um, so Sarah was taught the principles of love and the truth about ascension by her grandmother, Mother Mary, her father, Jesus of Nazareth, and her mother, Mary Magdalene. Her angelic and Pleiadian light shines out through every word. Read this book to change your life forever. It was a really quick read. I actually listened to it on Spotify. I listen to things a little fast. So there's one chapter in particular that I really want to talk about because it feels relevant to my life and so many other people that I'm talking to. I feel like in February with, the crazy astrology and the events of, files being released, like all really like what is the point? Like there's never, I shouldn't say never, because if you look at Project Looking Glass, right, and I'm getting really deep, it shows that, even in the darkness, light can be found, just saying. So, but the reason why this chapter stands out so much to me is I was just really upset, kind of getting into that 3D politics, like, how could you vote for this person? Blah, 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 blah. And I was really trying to, and I've done this before, try to get answers in meditation through the Akashic records. And every time I keep getting these two words, I'm like getting so annoyed. Master duality. I'm not even kidding. Master duality, master duality. Like you are here to master duality. And like my human side, I'm like getting pissed off. I'm like, no, this is wrong. You know what I mean? But it makes sense. My chart ruler is Gemini Mercury. I'm highly mercurial, right? I highly believe, yes, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. So many things. And I was like, I'm listening to this. I listened to this audiobook that I'm going to share a couple excerpts from 2 weeks ago. So I wanted to marinate first. I didn't want to just talk about it like right after I listened to it. But I remember listening to, I'm like, this chapter in particular, I need to talk about so badly because, first of all, chapter three is Gemini, the third zodiac sign, and three is also Hecate the witch, the mother, maiden, and the crone. We had that 3-3 eclipse, that 3-3-3, that was just very supercharged, super powerful. So the number of three is really ringing out to me. And I'm thinking if I want to read the whole chapter or excerpts. You know what? I'm going to read the whole thing. I might pause and do commentary. Chapter 3, The Principles of Duality, the Christian myth of the Garden of Eden. So the author is channeling this from Sarah. My mother, referring to Mary, frequently reminded me that all seeming opposites here in duality and earth are actually one, for they all come from the same source of oneness. Everything, she said, is one, so you cannot truly feel separation when you see from the heart. I learned to look and listen to other perspectives to find the harmony of oneness, something my mother urged me to do whenever I felt any type of conflict or challenge. It was not very difficult to make up my mind about what I wanted when I was a child, but I did give deep thought to what I believed, and my beliefs changed as I learned to find the truth in the situation. Apparently, this is a gift that not everyone has. I watched and began to understand how people align with things that make them feel happy or safe and avoid things that are different or frightening to them. Personally, even at 12, I was not frightened by things that were different. I was curious, I wanted to know more about how things worked so that I could understand it better. Therefore, every experience I had became an exploration of what I was feeling, thinking, and what choice I would like to make in response to my feelings and my thoughts. I was never one to act quickly, a quality I carried throughout my entire life on this planet. I realized that slow, considered, thoughtful action was more beneficial and would create the highest good for all, and that quick reactions based on raw feelings or unconsidered beliefs would cause a lot of pain and separation. Oof, been there, done that. I carefully listened and I considered how I was going to respond to what I either saw or heard. I see that on this planet still today, all of your experiences are wrapped up in a misunderstanding of the purpose of duality and a complete misuse of the principles of duality. Duality here on Earth is intended to offer you different and opposite perspectives to help you learn and grow. It is part of the human evolutionary journey to experience and work with duality to expand your consciousness. Ideally, when you see something that is opposite to your own point of view or belief, it is intended that you fully examine that opposite view, reconsider your own beliefs, and determine if you need to make changes on how you see and relate in the world. This is the proper use of duality. However, what I see you doing is aligning with whatever position supports your own beliefs while dismissing a wrong anything from the opposite perspective. This is causing a split or separation in you that causes you pain and further separation. Yeah, I definitely have done that before, and most likely you have too. It is not your fault that you have come to misuse duality so inappropriately. At one time, you knew how to blend all of your opposite views into new and ever changing beliefs. But then you began to separate yourselves into groups. I'm also thinking from a psychology perspective, in groups, out groups, blonde hair, was that experiment, Jane Elliott, brown eyes, blue eyes experiment? Where am I? My family came to Earth to help you guide back towards unity and away from the separation you were creating, but we failed our task. They're talking about the Pleiadians. You became even more engaged in misusing duality once we were gone, separating from each other because of your beliefs, stories about what my father and mother, so Jesus and Mary, were teaching, were eventually shaped and changed into a myth to serve another purpose. Exactly. Harrison and I talked about that. The Abrahamic patriarchal religions and the distortion of the pure teachings. And I did not grow up under Christianity or the Catholic Church. So I'm able to, I feel like, look at also that I'm a historian, the story of Jesus through a historical perspective. And I've always loved Jesus. I've always thought that he was a really cool guy. Like just studying him in history class, like I've always vibed with Jesus and Mary too. And it's interesting. I'm like, why do people call her a prostitute? Why do people call her a whore? Again, look at who writes the books. Anyway, so I've always thought that Jesus and Mary are cool people, just saying. And then we also, Harris and I talked about persecution of the Cathars, right, in the south of France, which is where this pilgrimage for Saint Sarah. So, anywho, uh, yeah, here we go. The Christian myth of the Garden of Eden was created long after my father, mother, grandmother, and I had left this earthly realm. I dislike even using the name Christian, for today's Christianity does not reflect the teachings of my family. It is a myth created for control rather than for growth and evolution. Hello! It does not tell the whole story, intentionally leaving out pieces that are key for humanity's understanding. The myth of Adam and Eve begins in the middle, not at the beginning. What is intentionally left out of the Christian myth is the beginning, where humanity actually lost its connection to divine source, intuitive wisdom, and evolutionary growth. The time when Adam was partnered with Lilith, not Eve. I have very powerful place in my heart for Lilith. She's very prominent in my astrology chart. I know that there's many Liliths. There's the mean Lilith, the true Lilith, and they're in very prominent points of my chart, very public facing, conjunct very personal planets. So I understand her. I understand Lilith, that exiles feminine. I get it. So Lilith, Adam's first wife, was deeply connected to nature and understood the patterns of chaos that were necessary for evolutionary change. She continually broke patterns of belief with unpredictable and vital erratic choices that inspired new thoughts and new patterns of behavior. So what I'm getting is the powers that be don't like uppity women that ask questions and make people think. Lilith was wild and chaotic herself. The feminine is wild and chaotic. The womb is wild and chaotic. We are the void. We're supposed to be. And her impulsive responses to life encouraged living in the moment, led by the energies that were inspired by her heart. She lived outside of history and time. Her heart's desire was to live in unity with Adam, moving together in response to energetic guidance as it arrives and integrating each other's opposite perspectives into a harmonic whole. That is the masculine and the feminine, the duality, the yin and the yang. But Adam found this challenging. He needed and preferred a more predictable and secure environment to make him feel safe and to plan for whatever might come next. The focus on next, a feature of time, not energy, caused them to move into a separation that increased as he brought more and more awareness of future and past into their present moment. Lilith found Adam's need for order and control of his environment too stifling for her, and one day she finally left with the wind. Although the chaotic energy Lilith represents will always be present, offering new opportunities and choices in every moment here on Earth, Lilith herself simply could not be confined to predictable patterns and order while she was living with Adam in the Garden of Eden. That was the role of another, who was actually invented by those who wrote the myth. That's that saying, history is written by the victors. Here's what I can share of how the truth was lost and the Christian myth took over humanity's path. According to the myth, Adam and Eve are named as the first inhabitants of the Garden of Eden. In truth, as Adam focused more and more on the separations of time, he lost the memory of being whole in himself and began to look for someone outside of him to make him feel complete. This is where the Christian myth of the Garden of Eden today begins, and the myth leaves out some very key points. First of all, the myth says that Eve was taken from Adam's rib, a part of him, yet Adam began to see Eve as someone outside of him. The unity Adam had experienced with Lilith was now forgotten. Rather than looking for paradise or happiness within himself, Adam began to look for paradise or happiness in conjunction with someone outside of himself. How many men wouldn't be able to survive if it wasn't for the labor of women, whether it's their mother, their wives, their girlfriends, their sisters? I speak to so many women in relationships with men, and not only the cooking and the housework, but just the emotional labor. I Just an observation. Anyway, but as father and mother always explained to me, you can never truly love another, nor can you feel complete if you are looking for love and completion outside of yourself. You are whole as you are, and divine relationships share their wholeness with one another rather than looking for a person outside of them to complete them or provide the love that should exist in their own hearts. For you are truly complete in your own hearts. You are sovereign. The telling of the Christian myth leads you further into ideas of the separation and away from ideas connected to divine unity. But the deception deepens. Eve is short for even, and Eve represents the patterns of order and balance. a huge step away from chaos and growth. Eve, or even, represents patterns that keep you safely away from changes that you do not understand or opportunities to explore other perspectives. So, what I'm getting from that is to be obedient, to be submissive, and follow these steps. And getting back to that, continually stay even closes your hearts to your intuition, the feminine void, that Lilith chaos, and separates you from the cycles of nature. You need balance, but you also need the chaos that brings change and evolution, as represented by Lilith's energy. Now we come to the tree of knowledge and the apple that Eve supposedly gave to Adam. Please notice that the myth names this powerful tree the tree of knowledge. It is not called the tree of wisdom in the myth. To understand the depth of this deception, you must realize that knowledge is based on facts and beliefs that are held in the mind, things that others discover, or that you learn or believe from experiences that come from something outside of you. You then store these outside facts and beliefs in your mind as the truth, although they may only be true for a moment. These facts are unreliable because they do not always fit the circumstances of the present. They're based upon past experience, and they're not always or often relevant to you individually or to what is true in the moment. This is the important piece. In contrast, wisdom lives in the heart. That's what I'm saying of when I was listening to this, right? There's that difference between in the knowledge, like the mind brain stuff, and this wisdom that's like a felt embodied sense. So wisdom lives in the heart. It is divine knowing that comes from inside of you based on your ever-present cosmic connection to source. Wisdom lives in your hearts to guide you moment by moment when you connect with and listen to your intuition, which is inside of you. Wisdom is not bound by the perception of time. Knowledge is ever changing. Wisdom is eternal. And just circling that back to too, where I talk about getting tongue-tied. Wisdom, talking about knowledge, and it's like the more I know, the less I know. So yeah, it's you can get degrees and diplomas and letters after your name, and you can be a prolific researcher, writer, and all these things. And do you have wisdom? Do you know who you are? I don't know if a lot of people can answer that question. So in the myth, the serpent represented as evil, which is live spelled backwards. That's interesting. Gave Eve the apple. The backward spelling of this word instills moving backwards from cosmic flow when you read the story, an intentional deception woven into the myth. They're hiding it in plain sight. The truth that is left out of the Christian myth is that because this apple came from the tree of knowledge rather than the tree of wisdom, the apple was poison to human consciousness. Eating the apple is symbolic to entering into a state of fear and separation by focusing on the beliefs in the mind, when you are designed to be led by the wisdom that lives in your heart. When you allow the mind to lead rather than the heart, you experience all of the emotions of fear, shame, guilt, unworthiness, jealousy, anger, and anything else that is emotionally uncomfortable. After one bite of this apple, Adam and Eve's perspective changed to a different way of seeing themselves. Then they made the mistake of believing they were unworthy and ran away from the Garden of Eden. The myth defines this mistake as a sin. If you look up the etymology of the word sin, you will find out that it means to make a mistake, as I mentioned earlier. My father taught that there is no such thing as a sinner. Everyone makes mistakes in order to grow. And he taught that we are not to judge those who make mistakes, but encourage their growth from what they can learn. The myth says that Adam and Eve became sinners when they ate from the tree of knowledge. But the reality is that their memory of who they were as divine beings connected to source was suddenly clouded by a new belief held in their minds. a belief that they were unworthy, which came from fear. Suddenly, they were ashamed of who they were and felt very guilty for having eaten this apple. They became afraid. The greatest toxin in the apple was fear, and they fled the Garden of Eden. Today, the use of this Christian myth condemns its followers as sinners who are unworthy and teaches them that making mistakes is bad and that they should fear being punished by God for their mistakes, which is the opposite of what my father and mother taught. The Christian religion teaches that you can be forgiven for your sins, but in truth, there's nothing to forgive, for each mistake is there to help you grow. It is simply your responsibility to learn from the mistakes that you make so that you become more conscious and loving. It is through the making of mistakes that you grow. You actually learn more from your mistakes than from your successes. That is true. I can easily see how today the myth of the Garden of Eden has led you to seek safety and order and predictability provided by sources outside of yourselves instead of continually listening to the cosmic wisdom that lives in your own hearts and is available through your intuition. Perhaps you may want to consider if it is possible that you have not yet learned a lesson from a mistake that you made, or if the lesson has been learned and you are able to see things from a higher perspective now. It is up to you to determine how you are growing. No one else can tell you this. The choice to accept and encourage guidance from outside of yourself is actually deepened, and your sense of separation from each other, from nature, and from source. You are living in guilt, insecurity, and fear, projecting the worst parts of yourselves on others as you defend who you believe yourself to be in your delusion. Oof. You seek to be even, like Eve, rather than embracing the chaos that Lilith brings in the wind to help you return to nature and invite natural ways of evolutionary growth. You are discovering that safety can never be promised by a family, a society, a religion, a government, an artificial medicine, or anyone else. Safety can only be found by returning to the wisdom contained in your own hearts, where you are intuitively guided by your connection to God or Source. This is what my grandmother, my mother, and my father tried to share with the world. It is what I am sharing with you now. You are all divine. You are all part of Source. You are each part of a magnificent, I was on such a roll, a magnificent design. I was like getting in that headspace, getting all reverendy. This is deep, and I wasn't planning on narrating the entire chapter, but I'm like, I can't distill like the top three things. Like this just needs to be read. In understanding this, if you choose to, you can peel off the shroud of Christian belief and control that has been placed over your eyes and begin to see and feel the true reality that my family has been trying to show you humanity from a very long time. Perhaps now in your time, you can choose to step away from following religions, governments, authorities, and especially your artificial technology that is supposed to make your life simpler, but in fact, seems to me to complicate and control you at an increasing speed. Hello, AI. Perhaps you all really need is to return to nature and invite the winds of change to bring transformations that are needed. You must be brave to do this. You must be willing to use courage and face the unknown. You must be willing to reconcile with each other and surrender the focus upon your differences, embracing your similarities instead. My father always counseled to love your neighbor as yourself. After all, each of you has a heart that is connected to all other hearts. Each of you struggles under the illusion of being alone or feeling unworthy because of forgetting your wholeness through your disconnection from Source. If you stop trying to defend your beliefs, which are mostly imposed upon you from myths like the Garden of Eden or other religious or governmental controls, and if you stop trying to preserve who you think you are by clinging onto old patterns of behavior that do not serve you or anyone else, you might have a future. one that arrives moment by moment as you connect to energy rather than time. You are destined to return to unity as you move away from all of the beliefs that you are separate from source and from each other. Duality serves a purpose, but only if you use it correctly. I'm speaking up today because energetically, it feels like now is the moment for you to focus on returning to a unified view of life and create a new myth to live by. This new story or new myth comes singing from my heart. You must return to nature, remembering that you are a part of nature. It is in nature that you will find your sense of connection to everything, including source and each other, a position that allows and encourages you to live in unity. It is in nature that you remember who you are and embrace Lilith's chaos in your own hearts as you find your own courage and your will to grow and change in a balanced way that is not even, but has waves of moment and change as you participate with each energy as it arrives. Through this new myth, you can learn to use duality properly, expel separation from your garden, and invite each other into unity again. Your garden will thrive through these choices. That was a lot of talking. I highly recommend this book. It's on Spotify, you can listen to it. I will post the link if you want to buy the book. I definitely want the author to benefit from me sharing this book. So thank you, Dr. Pia, for this. And I think that was enough commentary. And thank you so much for tuning in and listening. If you got this far, feel free to leave a comment on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and let me know what you thought of the podcast. I look forward to filming the next one, and thank you so much for listening. Again, this is Sarah with the Liminal Pathways Podcast.